Hi everyone, I hope you're having a peaceful day. In today's episode, we walk with Officer Lee into the final night of his undercover mission. The night when the Black Dragon case finally breaks open, and the price he pays is written on his own body. Far away, Sam can't explain why sleep won't come, as if her heart already knows something has gone wrong before dawn. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next episode of Sam and Lee. Evening thickened early over the yard, as if the sky itself had decided to dim the world before anyone was ready. A low blanket of clouds pressed down on the tin roof, muting the usual clangs and shouts scattered around the warehouse. It wasn't quiet, not truly, but the noise carried a different tone tonight, lower, rigid, almost rehearsed. Something was shifting in the crew. Even the air seemed to know. Lee, still Lamb to everyone here, walked in through the open gate with a deliberate calm. He carried the same posture he had worn for months. Shoulders slightly forward, hands relaxed, gaze down just enough to avoid looking like he was searching for anything. It was a posture that said nothing, revealed nothing, promised nothing. But inside him, something had begun to tighten. This was the night the police had whispered about through the encrypted channel. The night the operation would close in, the night everything he had carried alone would finally break open. He moved slowly toward the loading area where several men stood circling a newly arrived truck. A larger one, clean, reinforced, nothing like the rusted haulers they usually used for smaller transfers. Thick rope tied down the top. Metal clamps sealed the sides. 4 men guarded it with expressions like cracked stone. This was the shipment the Black Dragon gang had been preparing for weeks. The biggest one, the one Boss Nam had said would change the scale of the business. And Lee had been chosen to ride with it. Fong appeared beside him without warning, the smell of smoke clinging to his jacket. Fong didn't look nervous, he rarely did, but tonight his eyes held a different kind of sharpness. "Lamb," he grunted, tapping ash from his cigarette. "Boss wants you on the big run." Lee didn't lift his head. He only let the silence rest for half a breath before replying. "When do we move?" "Soon." No explanation, no details. Just that single word carried in a voice too low and too tight. Fong's eyes flicked over Lee's face, searching for something. Hesitation, fear, reaction. Lee gave him none. The trick of surviving undercover work was simple. Don't perform. Too much confidence was as suspicious as too much worry. "Keep your mouth shut tonight," Fong added, lowering his voice even further. "Boss brought in outsiders for this run. Serious men, the kind who don't forgive mistakes." It wasn't advice. It was a warning. Lee nodded once, feeling the weight of the device tucked under his shirt. The location transmitter the police had given him. He hadn't used it yet. He wouldn't until the moment he confirmed the cargo and the route. The timing had to be perfect. If he signaled too early, he'd die before backup arrived. Too late, and the whole shipment would cross into foreign hands. He glanced at the truck again. A tarp shifted in the breeze, revealing just the edge of a crate. Enough to know what waited inside, enough to know this was the moment months of slow, careful infiltration had been building toward. "Lamb!" someone barked. Lee turned. Boss Nam stood at the center of the yard, posture relaxed in a way only dangerous men manage. He didn't motion dramatically, just crooked a finger, subtle and lethal. Lee approached. Nam looked him over with a quiet, unreadable expression. "This run is important," he said. "I want silence, I want obedience, and I want no mistakes." "Yes, boss." Nam studied him for another second, as if weighing the air around him. Then he turned away, dismissing Lee without another word. And just like that, it was set. Lee would ride on the truck, carrying the largest shipment the gang had ever assembled, and the police would be waiting for his signals somewhere in the dark. A cloud of dust swirled around his feet as a gust of wind pushed through the yard. It carried the scent of rain, a scent he had always connected with home, with Sam, with mornings on the hillside where life moved gently. He wondered what she was doing at this exact moment. He wondered if she felt it too, the way something heavy was about to break. Miles away, on the quiet hill, where their wooden house clung to the earth like something grown rather than built, Sam stepped outside with a wicker tray hugged to her chest. She had planned to bring in the last of the herbs she'd hung to dry earlier that afternoon, but the moment she reached the porch, she stopped. The wind was wrong, not violent, not cold, just restless, like hands brushing against the house but never settling. She set the tray down and looked out toward the darkening sky. Clouds hung low, heavier than usual, smudging the last lines of daylight. Crickets chirped, but even their sound felt distant. Inside, the radio sputtered through a broken patch of static. She had left it on all evening, hoping for a familiar voice or a comforting story, anything to quiet the steady unease that had been climbing through her chest since late afternoon. But the radio wouldn't behave. It hissed. It clicked. It delivered only fractured pieces of the world beyond the hill. Border activity, the monitoring increased. Night operation, undisclosed location, heavy transport, suspicious routes. Sam closed her eyes. Her breath trembled. She told herself it was nothing, just news, just noise. She carried the tray inside and tried to distract herself, tidying the bowls, wiping the table, folding a towel that didn't need folding. The lamp flickered as she passed it, casting long shadows that swayed and stretched across the wooden floor. Nothing helped. It felt as if the night itself was leaning against the house, waiting. A knock startled her, sharp, quick, not unkind. Sam opened the door to see Oan standing there, scarf pulled tight around her shoulders, hair whipped by the wind. "I was nearby," Oan said, voice a little breathless. "Thought I should stop in." Sam managed a small smile. "Come in. The wind sounds strange tonight." Oan stepped inside, glancing around the dim room. "You feel it too. I've had a heaviness all afternoon. Couldn't shake it." Sam swallowed. Her throat felt tight. They sat for a while without saying much. The tea cooled between them. The radio crackled once more, then finally went silent altogether. Oan placed her hand over Sam's. "You don't have to say anything," she murmured. "But I know what it feels like to wait for someone who's far from home." Sam looked down. A single breath shuddered through her. When Oan left, Sam walked to the doorway again and wrapped her arms around herself. The night pressed close, smelling faintly of damp earth and the first hint of rain. Somewhere deep inside, a truth settled. Lee was out there tonight, and something was coming for him. She didn't know how she knew. She just did. The wind shifted again, brushing her cheek like a warning. She closed her eyes. "Please," she whispered, "wherever you are, be safe." She stayed there a long time, listening to the uneasy quiet, waiting for a dawn she wasn't sure would come gently. The truck rolled out of the yard just after midnight. There were no shouted orders, no rushing footsteps, no dramatic send-off. Just engines starting in the dark, headlights cutting thin lines through the mist, and the quiet understanding among the men that tonight was not like the others. Lee sat in the passenger seat, the window cracked slightly, letting the cold air brush against his face. The driver, a man named Tieuca, heavy-set and quiet, kept both hands on the wheel. 2 motorcycles rode ahead, another followed behind. The formation was tighter than usual, silent and sharp, like a blade held close. This was the final shipment, the one the gang had built their confidence on, the one Lee had been waiting months to confirm. Now he only needed the right moment to send the signal. A long stretch of road unfolded ahead, borderland terrain, half paved, half red dirt, the kind of road where sound traveled strangely and shadows clung to the hillsides. Lee lowered his gaze, appearing bored, indifferent. Inside his jacket, one finger found the tiny transmitter. One press would activate it, but not yet. Not until he saw the cargo with his own eyes. The truck slowed. They had arrived. A clearing opened among the trees, a flat patch of earth lit by a single portable floodlight. Several men waited there, their shadows stretching in long, thin shapes across the ground. A second truck stood beside them, its tarp already undone. No turning back now. Lee stepped out with the others, the cold night meeting him like a wall. The engines cut, and the world shifted into something quieter, darker, expectant. Even the wind seemed to hover. Boss Nam emerged from behind the other truck, wearing a coat heavier than the night required. His steps were unhurried, measured the way dangerous men walked when they knew everyone else would step aside. "Unload it," he said simply. No shouting, no ceremony, just that one command. Lee joined the group, lifting the crates. They were heavy, too heavy for agricultural goods. His muscles strained as he set the first one down, then the second. When the tarp came off the final crate and the floodlight hit the markings on its side, he saw what he needed. Same code, same weight class, same smuggling pattern they'd traced for months. It was enough. Lee exhaled slowly and stepped back from the group. He shifted his foot, pretended to adjust his boot, and pressed the transmitter. A tiny vibration confirmed the signal. No sound, no light, just the smallest tremor against his skin. Somewhere out there in the dark, someone would see it. Now he just had to survive long enough for them to arrive. He straightened, wiping dust from his hands. But when he turned, he found one of the newer men, Hall, standing uncomfortably close. Hal stared at him with an expression too sharp, too alert, as if searching his face for something that shouldn't be there. "The way you move," Hal muttered, voice low. "I don't like it." Lee didn't look away, didn't defend himself. Silence was his shield. But silence could also draw suspicion. Before he could step aside, Hal reached out, quick, instinctive, and yanked Lee's jacket open at the side. The transmitter slipped half an inch from its place, just enough to show. Hal's breath froze in his chest. Lee saw the moment realization struck. Dark, absolute. "You..." He didn't finish the sentence. His knife was out in one motion, not wild, not loud, just a clean, practiced movement meant to kill without drama. Lee twisted, but not fast enough. The blade entered just below his ribs, angled inward, shallow but vicious in its intent. A hot wave burst through him, not pain exactly, more like a sudden emptiness spreading under his skin. He gritted his teeth. No sound escaped him. Hal raised the knife for a second strike, but the night exploded first. It began with lights, sharp, blinding, cutting through the trees like a flood of dawn arriving too early. "Police! Don't move!" The clearing fractured into chaos, not loud chaos, but desperate motion. Men scattering, footsteps pounding on dirt, orders shouted, metal clattering, the dull thud of bodies hitting the ground. Lee stumbled back, hand pressed to his side, warmth seeped through his shirt. The world tilted, swaying like a slow wave, pulling at his balance, but he forced himself upright, eyes searching through the blur of movement. A figure rushed past him, Fong, not running toward him, not helping him, just trying to escape like everyone else. For the first time, Lee saw confusion flicker in Fong's eyes, as if the truth had hit him hard. Lam wasn't Lam. Lam had never been Lam. That moment of shock distracted Hal long enough for two officers to pin him to the ground. His knife skidded across the dirt, catching the floodlight before disappearing under someone's boot. Lee's vision darkened at the edges. He reached for the truck to steady himself. Someone shouted, "Officer down here!" A hand caught his arm, another steadied his back. "You're hurt! Stay with us!" The voice felt close and far at the same time. Lee tried to speak, but his breath hitched. Pain finally found its voice, radiating through his ribs like a slow burning tide. "Sam," he whispered, barely audible. Not a cry, not a plea, just the truth of who his heart reached for first. The officers lifted him toward the emergency vehicle. His legs buckled, and for a moment the world turned weightless, floating between darkness and the red-blue flashes painting the trees. The last thing he saw was the sky, grey, still, unmoving, a sky that felt like dawn before dawn. Sam hadn't gone to bed. She sat on the porch, wrapped in her thin shawl, staring at the dark road, even though she knew she wouldn't see anything. She didn't know what time it was, only that the night felt longer than any she had lived through. A sudden gust of wind pushed against the house, rattling the windows. Sam closed her eyes, a hand pressed over her heart. Something inside her tightened sharply, like a string pulled too hard. And though she had no proof, no sign, no reason, she whispered into the darkness. "Lee!" Her voice barely a breath, as if somewhere far away something in the night had broken. Sometimes a night can change everything. Not with noise, but with one quiet moment when a life almost slips away. And even when distance hides the ones we love, the heart still knows when something breaks. In the end, love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the hope that tomorrow will bring them safely home.